All my childhood was based on a lie. Not a metaphor. Not an exaggeration. A cold, searing truth I discovered at 40, standing in an attic, covered in dust and disbelief. I had come home to sort through my mother's belongings. She had passed away 2 weeks earlier, a stroke, sudden and brutal, like a shot to the back. At the funeral, I held it together. Gave speeches. Accepted condolences. Played the role of the perfect daughter. Just as she would have wanted. But on that attic, I became an orphan. I found a box of letters. At first, I thought they were romantic mementos, maybe from college, maybe love letters from Dad during his military service. But when I opened the first envelope, my whole world tilted. Dear Helen, I can't stop thinking about you after our night shift. The way you laughed when I gave you that injection straight to the heart. My little Cupid joke, remember? Yours, George. George. Not my father's name. That was the name of our family doctor. Dr. George Myers. The man I'd called Uncle George my whole life. The man who came to our house more than Santa Claus ever did. The man who gave me shots, knew my blood type, treated my fevers, and played chess with my dad on Sundays. I couldn't breathe. The letters spilled onto the floor like cursed petals. Each one full of affection. Each one recalling the night everything changed, and mentioning little Claire, me. Do you think he suspects? She wrote in one letter. No. He loves being a father too much to ever doubt it, he replied in another. I was shaking. I felt like I was being hollowed out. Every photo from my childhood, a lie. Every dinner conversation, a lie. Every time my dad rested his hand on my shoulder and said, "You're just as stubborn as I was at your age," it was a lie built on betrayal. I couldn't call anyone. Couldn't scream. I just sat there on the attic floor, surrounded by cards, albums, the smell of mold and memory, and for the first time in my life, I had no idea who I was. Not metaphorically. Literally. My name was Claire Bennett. Daughter of David and Helen Bennett. And now, who was I? Whose blood ran through me? I knew what I had to do. I had to find him. Dr. George Myers. My real father. And make him look me in the eye. I walked back to the hotel in a daze. One box of letters, that's all it took to shatter 40 years of my life like an old mirror, loud, painful, and with shards digging deep into my soul. The room was quiet. The TV played muted news, a cup of coffee sat cooling on the table. Everything felt absurd. The coffee, the hotel, even my clothes, as if I were playing dress-up in someone else's life. I started searching for him online. Dr. George Myers, New York, family physician, and there he was. That face. More wrinkles than I remembered, more gray in his hair, wearier eyes. But they were my eyes. My stare. The same slight squint when he smiled that I saw in the mirror all my life. I just stared at the screen. He lived 3 hours away. That's it. While I was growing up, going to college, getting married, divorced, restarting my life, he was somewhere nearby. And did he know? Did he know? The next day, I got in the car and drove. I didn't call. Didn't want to warn him. I needed to see his face the moment he realized who was standing at his door. I didn't have a plan. Just rage, confusion, and a hollow pit where my center used to be. But when I got out of the car and approached his house, modest, with a garden and an old bike leaning against the wall, I started to tremble. I stood there, hand frozen near the doorbell. Then he opened the door. As if he'd sensed it. "Can I help you?" he asked, squinting at me. I looked into the eyes of a man who had known about my existence, and stayed silent. "Dr. Myers," I said. "My name is Claire. Claire Bennett." He froze. A subtle twitch of the lips. His eyes scanning my face. And then a slight step back. He knew. You're Helen's daughter?" he asked quietly. I'm the daughter of the woman you had an affair with behind my father's back. Claire. Don't say my name. You lost that right when you signed those letters, yours, George. He closed his eyes. I thought he'd deny it. Say it was a mistake. That he didn't know. But he just nodded. I knew. Those two words hit harder than anything I could have imagined. So you let me grow up in a lie, I snapped. Watched my dad teach me how to ride a bike. Read me bedtime stories. Cry when I left for college. And you? You just hovered around as the family friend? I wanted to, he exhaled. I wanted to tell you. Many times. But your mother. Helen begged me not to. She said David loved you too much. That he'd raise you like his own, no matter what. He did love me. But he deserved to know. He would have kept you, George said, staring at the ground. But he would have left her. I felt sick. I saw my mother holding my tiny hand, telling me, Daddy will always be here. A lie. Every bedtime, every sweet gesture, was it atonement? Or a cover-up? And you? I asked. Did you ever want to be a father? Or were you just comfortable watching from the shadows, calling yourself uncle? He didn't answer right away. Then, quietly, he said. I called myself uncle because that's all I was allowed to be. And I was grateful, even for that. I didn't know what was worse, his words or my own reaction. Because part of me wanted him to be a monster. But standing there was just an old man with hollow eyes and a heart full of guilt. But I hadn't come for apologies. I came to start untangling the knot. And I had only just begun. Would you like to come in? He asked, once the silence between us became unbearable. I didn't answer right away. Did I want to come in? Did I want to sit inside the house of the man who had erased himself from my life for 4 decades? I have questions, I finally said. And I'm not asking them on your front porch. He stepped aside and let me in. The house was exactly what I expected, neat, almost sterile, like no one actually lived in it. It smelled of antiseptic, old books, and something else, something familiar, almost childlike. I sat on the edge of the couch, while he settled into an armchair across from me, like two strangers at a therapist's office. My mother died 2 weeks ago, I began. Stroke. He nodded, eyes down. I heard, from a neighbor. I'm very sorry. Sorry? I almost laughed. You're sorry the woman you had an affair with died, taking your biggest lie with her? He exhaled. It was complicated. No, I snapped. Complicated is living with someone you betrayed. Complicated is looking your daughter in the eye while keeping the truth from her. You? You chose the easy way. I was young, he started, but I raised my hand sharply. Don't hide behind youth. I'm 40. And I know damn well that silence is a choice. He went quiet. I have only one question, I said. Why? Why did you agree to be Uncle George when you could have been my father? He looked at me. And in his eyes, there was no dodging, no melodrama, just exhaustion. Because I was a coward. Those words hung in the air. And I realized, he meant it. He hadn't protected Mom. He hadn't protected me. He had protected himself. I was afraid, he continued. Afraid of destroying someone else's family. Afraid of responsibility. I was a doctor, but I had no idea how to be a father. And then, it just went too far. You called me uncle. You smiled. And I convinced myself that at least I could be near you. I stood up. You weren't near me. You were a ghost. Background noise. A neighbor in my life. And now I'm 40 and I don't know who I am. You stole my right to know the truth. He stood, too. Took a step closer, but not too close. I understand if you don't want anything to do with me. But if you want to know who I was, who I am, I'll tell you. And that was the moment I never saw coming. I nodded. I nodded, even though part of me wanted to throw everything in his face. I nodded because, underneath the anger and betrayal and shattered identity, a tiny, unwelcome thought flickered. What if I do want to know him? I have photos, letters. I kept them, he said. I followed your life. Through your mom. Sometimes through friends. I never interfered. But I was proud of you. You were proud of the lie? I whispered. No, he said. Proud of who you became despite the lie. I sat back down. And suddenly I was cold. This wasn't the end. This was the beginning. A beginning full of pain, broken edges, but necessary. My mother lied. So did he. But now, I decide what to do with the truth. I spent nearly 2 hours at his house. Time moved strangely, slowing down, then slipping away. George brought out a box filled with letters and photographs. Some of them were of me, as a little girl, at the park, on the swings, in my school uniform. Pictures I'd never seen before. Did my mom give you these? I asked. Sometimes. And sometimes I took them myself, from a distance. He fell silent. I know how that sounds. Creepy. But I needed to see you grow up. Without knowing you were my father, I said coldly. He nodded. I was near. But not where I should have been. Then he pulled out a letter. This is from your mother. Her last one. She wrote it a year ago and sent it to me. I never replied. I took the envelope. It was her handwriting, sharp, precise, strict. Always like that. George. If you're reading this, it means I'm still alive. But I can feel the end coming. I've had dreams, you, me, Claire, together. Not in life. In dreams. I know you're angry. Maybe you think I was cruel. Maybe I was. But I was afraid. Afraid of destroying my family, of losing everything. And Claire, she was happy. David loved her. He loved her in a way you never could, because he didn't carry the guilt. But you're her father. You have a right to know. And if the day ever comes when she learns the truth, please, don't push her away. She's not to blame. For anything. My vision blurred. But I didn't cry. Not quite. I just sat there, holding the letter, feeling like everything I knew about my life had shrunk, cracked, and crumbled. My mother had asked for forgiveness, in her own distant way. My biological father was sitting across from me. And I, the supposedly happy daughter, felt, for the first time, like I didn't belong to myself. What do you want? I asked, breaking the silence. From me. Now. George looked at me directly, calm. I don't want to disrupt your life. I'm not asking you to call me Dad. I just want you to know I'm here. If you ever want to talk, ask questions. Or just come for tea. I won't hide anymore. But I won't force anything either. And you think that's enough? I said slowly. After 40 years? He didn't answer. And in that silence, for the first time, there wasn't cowardice. Only acceptance. I stood up. I need to think. Of course, he said. Take all the time you need. When I stepped outside, the air felt different. Not lighter. Not fresher. Just real. I didn't know where to go. Back to the hotel? Home? The ocean? But I knew one thing. Family isn't always the people who raised you. And it's not always those who share your blood. Sometimes, family is what's left after the truth. I didn't go home. I got in the car, turned on the GPS, and drove to the ocean. As a kid, Mom used to take me there, especially when Dad was away on business trips. We'd sit on the cold sand, eat cookies from a thermos, and she'd tell me the waves helped her think. Now I understood why. I sat on the beach wrapped in a blanket, rereading the letters. They were tucked into my bag, folded neatly like evidence in the case of a broken childhood. But this wasn't just about my mother anymore. It was about me. About identity. About the right to know. Every word Helen, she no longer felt like mom but simply Helen, had written carried anxiety. Guilt. But also love. Maybe she truly thought she was protecting me. Maybe she was afraid not just for herself, but for me too. I remembered the time I fell down the school stairs in 5th grade and split my chin. Who showed up? Dr. Myers. Not Dad. Not Mom. George. He was the first to calm me, to hold my hand while they stitched me up. I remember thinking, why did he get there so fast? Now I knew. Because a father's heart always knows where his child is. I called Aunt Jane, Mom's younger sister. We hadn't spoken in a while. But I needed to hear from someone who knew Helen before I did. Claire, she sounded surprised. Is everything okay? Not exactly. I have questions. About Mom. About the past. This about the funeral? No. It's about what came before. Did you know who my real father was? Silence. Long uncomfortable. Aunt Jane? Oh God, she whispered. I always hoped you'd never find out. It hit me like a punch. She knew. So it wasn't just Mom's secret. Claire, it was an agreement. She begged me to stay quiet. I wanted to tell you, I did, but I was afraid it would ruin everything. Everything's already ruined, I said, my voice tightening. And now I'm sitting on a beach wondering who else knew. Just me. Anne. Grandma. But she passed when you were 8. And Dad? He never suspected? No. He adored you. He once told me, that little girl, she's my whole heart. That's when I broke. For the first time since the funeral, I cried. Not because of the betrayal. But because of the love. Dad, real or not, had loved me without condition. Without doubt. Without a single drop of DNA. Thank you, Aunt Jane, I whispered. You're the only one not pretending anymore. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for staying silent. I hung up and sat there, just me, the wind, the crashing waves, and a truth I hadn't chosen, but was now mine. And then I made a decision. I'd write about it. All of it. The lies. The search. The family that's not made by blood, but by choice. If I've been given this story, I'm going to tell it. A week passed. I returned home, but it no longer felt like home. Every object reminded me of Mom. But now, in a different way. Not as the woman who baked my favorite lemon pie or stroked my hair when I had a fever. But as someone who had lied to my face for years, smiling as she did it. I looked at her photo on the mantel and didn't know who I was seeing. A mother. A liar. A victim. A protector. All of it at once. I hadn't told anyone, not friends, not coworkers. This was my private collapse, and I didn't want to pull anyone else into the rubble. But I didn't sleep. Dad appeared in my dreams almost every night. The real one. David Bennett. The man who taught me to fish and cried at my graduation. Did he know? No. He couldn't have. He couldn't have faked it like that. Part of me wished he had known. That he'd chosen to stay anyway. But more than that, I wanted to return to that childhood, where the lie was sweet like candy. And I didn't know it was poison inside. I went to his grave. Took the letters with me. Sat beside it, right on the grass. And read them aloud. One by one. I'm sorry, I said, looking at the granite. For not knowing. For Mom not telling you. For not knowing who I am now. It felt like the wind stilled. Like he was listening. But I'm still your daughter. You raised me. Loved me. Protected me. I can't forget that. Ever. I left him one letter, the one where Mom wrote that he would have loved me, even if he'd known. Let him read it. Wherever he is. And then I did the thing I'd feared most. I called George. Hi, I said. Can we meet? He was silent for half a second. Then said. Of course. Anytime. We met at a cafe. Neutral ground. No shadows of the past. He came with a photo. Of himself, young. In a lab coat. And one of his mother, my grandmother, whom I never knew. She died when I was 27, he said. But she would have loved you. She always said blood doesn't matter, only choice. You think you were a good choice? I asked quietly. He looked down. Then, no. Now. I'm trying. We sat in silence. And suddenly, I didn't feel anger. Or bitterness. Just exhaustion. I don't know what to do with you, George, I said. I don't know who you are to me now. I'm not asking for anything, he said. I just want to be around. However I can. And then I said a sentence I hadn't planned. Okay. Let's start with coffee. He smiled, almost in relief. We talked about little things. The weather. My work. His practice. It wasn't a breakthrough. But it was a start. The first step. We started messaging. No drama. No expectations. Just short texts a few times a week. He sent photos, at conferences, with colleagues, and with his dog, Molly. I didn't always reply right away. But I always replied. It became familiar. Not comforting, but steady. One day, he wrote. Thank you for replying. I stared at the screen for a while. Those 3 words meant more than any confession. Meanwhile, I started writing a book. Not a journal, a real story. With a beginning, a breaking point, and everything in between. The title came easily. A daughter between 2 fathers. Writing hurt. The attic. The doorstep. The letter at the grave. But the pain felt clean, like cutting away something that shouldn't have stayed. I didn't want revenge. I wanted understanding. Of myself. Of her. Of him. In January, I sent him a message. I want to meet Molly. He replied almost instantly. She'll be thrilled. And so will I. Molly was a whirlwind of joy, wagging, licking, climbing into my lap. And for the first time in ages, I laughed. Really laughed. We drank tea. I told him about the book. He listened quietly, didn't interrupt. Then he asked. Have you always written? Only in my head. Now, on paper. Could I read it someday? I looked at him, older, tired, but with the same eyes I see in the mirror. Maybe. As I was leaving, he said. I've often wondered who you'd have become if I'd raised you. Still stubborn, I smiled. But probably with worse teeth. Mom said mine came from Dad. He laughed, truly laughed. And I realized, we weren't father and daughter in the usual sense. But maybe, we were part of the same chapter. Spring came quickly. The snow vanished as if it had never been there. But I knew better, the past doesn't melt. It lingers. In traces, smells, words. My book was nearly done. I polished chapters, trimmed lines, rewrote scenes. It was no longer just a story about lies, it had become a story about growing up. Late. Painful. But real. One day, George texted. I want to show you something. It's important. We met in his garden. He was holding an old shoebox. Found it in the attic, he said. Thought it was lost. Inside were photos, letters, a notebook, and one envelope with my name on it. In my mother's handwriting. I didn't open it, he said quietly. She must have written it for you. But never gave it. We went inside. Molly curled up on my lap. I opened the envelope. Dear Claire. If you're reading this, I'm gone. I couldn't say it to your face. I was afraid. But you've always been stronger than me. I loved you. Even when I was lying. You're my best decision, even if it was born from fear. Forgive us. And choose how to live with this now. With love. Mom. I read it aloud. George didn't say a word. He just nodded. Slowly. Silently. That letter was 40 years late, he said. And still, it feels like I just met you. I stood to leave. At the door, I paused. Looked back at him. And said, for the first time, take care, Dad. He froze. And then, he cried. It wasn't the end. But it was a line. And maybe, a beginning. Summer arrived quietly. And with it, silence. The kind that doesn't scare you anymore. The kind where there's no need to pretend. The book was published in June. A small press, a modest print run. But it was my story. On the cover, a tree with two trunks, woven into one. Tagline. Based on the letters that changed everything. I sent George a copy. He wrote back. I read it in one night. Cried 3 times. I've never been prouder of you. For the first time, I sent him a voice message. You once said your mother would have liked me. I want to know about her. And about you. The past doesn't scare me anymore. The next day, we sat in his garden, beside blooming peonies. He told stories about growing up in Brooklyn, about his mom's strange minestrone soup, with bananas. We laughed. In his memories, I didn't just hear his life. I heard pieces of mine, hidden between the lines. He showed me a photo. A newborn, wrapped in a blanket. Red face. Tiny fists. Is that me? Yes. The day you were born. I stood behind the glass. And your mother looked at me, and nodded. That was her yes. I held the photo. And suddenly, I understood, the truth wasn't in letters. Or in DNA. It was here. In this quiet. In this garden. Where silence became forgiveness. And laughter, a kind of family. I used to think this story would never end. That it would follow me like a shadow. But one day, I realized. It wasn't a wound anymore. It was a scar. And scars don't hurt. They just remember. That fall, I held a small book event at the local library. Maybe 20 people showed up, a few friends, a few strangers. George sat in the 3rd row, wearing a jacket, holding flowers. I read the attic scene. The letters. The lies. And the part where I said. Truth doesn't set you free right away. First, it breaks you. There was a moment of silence. Then applause. And his eyes, red but full of light. After the reading, he came up to me. Wasn't it scary? Reading about me? It wasn't a story about you, I said. It was a story about me. Then a woman approached us. Maybe in her 60s. Kind voice, gentle face. You know. I once found a letter from my father. Years after he passed. Thank you. You didn't just write your story. You wrote ours. Driving home, I didn't play music. For the first time in a while, I didn't need distraction. I just drove. And thought. Now I know who I am. Claire Bennett. Daughter of a man who gave me love. Daughter of a man who gave me life. A woman who walked through a lie. And didn't become one. And now I want to ask you. Envelope with arrow. Have you ever found a letter that changed how you saw your past? Ear. Could you forgive someone who loved you, but didn't tell you the whole truth? Candle. Do you believe that family is not about blood, but choice? Share it. Tell your story. Because maybe this one is yours too.